The night was unusually still, the kind of silence that seemed to press down on the streets of the suburban neighborhood like a heavy blanket. Officer Ryan Callahan gripped the steering wheel of his patrol car, his knuckles turning white. He was nearing the end of his shift, but something in him always stirred during the late hours, a mix of vigilance and something darker, a simmering distrust he would never admit aloud. The radio crackled with mundane updates from other officers, but Ryan barely listened. His eyes scanned the empty streets, looking for anything out of place. That was when he saw it. A rusty sedan creeping through the neighborhood at an hour when most people were tucked into bed. The car looked old, its headlights slightly dim, the engine emitting a faint, uneven growl as it rolled to a stop at a corner. Ryan felt his pulse quicken. Something about the scene triggered his instincts, or at least that was the justification he gave himself as he flipped on his patrol car's lights and pulled out behind the sedan. The car hesitated for a moment before turning onto a quieter street, and that hesitation was all the confirmation Ryan needed. He activated his siren and the car pulled over to the side of the road. Ryan parked his car and stepped out, adjusting his utility belt as he approached the driver's side window. The driver rolled the window down, and Ryan was momentarily taken aback by the man's calm demeanor. The driver was a black man, probably in his late 30s or early 40s, with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes that seemed to hold a depth Ryan couldn't quite place. The man's hands were resting visibly on the steering wheel, his posture relaxed but not dismissive. "Good evening, officer," the man said in a voice that was steady, almost soothing. "Is there a problem?" Ryan's training kicked in, and he forced his expression to remain neutral. "License and registration, please," he said, ignoring the question. The man nodded and slowly reached into the glove compartment, pulling out the requested documents. As he handed them over, Ryan noticed the faint scars that lined the man's forearms, intricate patterns that looked like they carried stories of their own. His eyes flicked to the man's left arm, where a faded tattoo of an eagle perched atop a shield caught his attention. It was unmistakably military. "What's a guy like you doing in this neighborhood at this hour?" Ryan asked, his tone laced with suspicion. The man raised an eyebrow but kept his voice even. "Just heading home from work, officer. I'm a night shift supervisor at the warehouse on Franklin Street." Ryan glanced at the license and registration, noting the name Isaiah Daniels. Something about the name tickled the edges of his memory, but he couldn't quite place it. He looked back at Isaiah, studying him more closely. "You been drinking tonight?" Ryan asked, his voice sharper now. Isaiah's calm expression faltered slightly, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "No, sir, I don't drink. You're welcome to test me if you'd like." Ryan's gaze lingered on Isaiah for a moment longer before he stepped back. He didn't smell alcohol, and the man's eyes were clear, but there was something about him that Ryan couldn't shake. He circled the car, shining his flashlight into the back seat, which was empty save for a worn duffel bag. When he returned to the driver's side, he noticed Isaiah watching him, his expression unreadable. "Step out of the car," Ryan ordered, his hand hovering near his holster. Isaiah hesitated for the briefest moment before complying, his movements deliberate and unthreatening. He stepped out and stood beside the car, his hands at his sides, as Ryan began a pat-down search. "Is this really necessary, officer?" Isaiah asked, his voice calm but with an edge of frustration. Ryan ignored the question, focusing instead on the duffel bag in the back seat. He gestured toward it. "What's in the bag?" "Just some work clothes and a pair of boots," Isaiah replied. "You can check if you want." Ryan opened the car door and unzipped the bag, finding exactly what Isaiah had described. Still, the tension in his chest didn't ease. He straightened up and looked Isaiah in the eyes. "I'm going to need you to come down to the station." Isaiah's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "On what grounds?" Ryan hesitated. He didn't have a solid answer, and he knew it. But the unease he felt wouldn't let him back down. "Suspicious behavior," he said finally. Isaiah let out a slow breath, his shoulders rising and falling as if he were forcing himself to stay calm. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's go." Ryan placed the cuffs on Isaiah's wrists, the cold metal clicking into place. As he led him to the squad car, Isaiah glanced over his shoulder and said something that sent a shiver down Ryan's spine. "You don't even remember, do you?" Ryan froze for a moment, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. Isaiah didn't answer, his expression unreadable as he climbed into the back of the patrol car. The drive to the station was silent, the tension in the car palpable. Ryan stole glances at Isaiah through the rearview mirror, trying to decipher the man's cryptic remark. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something familiar about him, something just out of reach. When they arrived at the station, Ryan led Isaiah inside, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the room. As he processed Isaiah's information, Ryan's mind raced. Who was this man? Why did he feel like a ghost from a past Ryan couldn't quite remember? As Ryan finished the paperwork, Isaiah sat quietly in the holding cell, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. He watched Ryan with a look that was equal parts curiosity and pity. The silence was heavy, broken only by the occasional rustle of paper or the distant hum of conversation from other officers. Finally, Isaiah spoke, his voice low but firm. "Sometimes we save people who would never do the same for us." Ryan's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing as he met Isaiah's gaze. "What do you mean by that?" he asked, his voice colder than he intended. Isaiah didn't answer, his expression unreadable as he leaned back against the wall of the cell. The words echoed in Ryan's mind long after he left the station that night. They followed him home, into his dreams, and back to the station the next day. And though he didn't know it yet, those words were the key to unlocking a memory that would change his life forever. The air in the station was thick with a mixture of tension and routine. Officer Ryan Callahan sat at his desk, staring at the report he had just finished typing. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating to hit the save button. The man in the holding cell, Isaiah Daniels, had been unervingly calm since his arrest. There was something about his demeanor that unsettled Ryan, something that kept pulling at the edges of his memory. Isaiah's words from the previous night echoed in his mind like a haunting refrain. "Sometimes we save people who would never do the same for us." Ryan shook his head as if to clear the thought, but it clung to him like a stubborn shadow. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearing noon, and the station was bustling with activity. Officers passed by, chatting, filing reports, and going about their duties, but Ryan felt disconnected from it all. He turned his attention back to the computer screen and finally pressed save. The printer whirred to life, spitting out the report. Isaiah's belongings were laid out on a table nearby, neatly cataloged and bagged. Among them was a worn leather wallet, a set of keys, and a military ID card. Ryan reached for the ID card, his curiosity finally getting the better of him. He held it up, studying the photo and the name printed beneath it. Isaiah Daniels. Something about the name felt familiar, but Ryan couldn't quite place it. He flipped the card over, noticing the faint imprint of a seal and the words United States Army etched into the surface. The memories hit him like a tidal wave. Years earlier, Ryan had been a young soldier stationed overseas. He had been part of a mission that went disastrously wrong, an ambush in the dead of night. Ryan could still remember the chaos, the deafening sound of gunfire, and the searing pain of a bullet tearing through his leg. He had been left behind, bleeding out and terrified, when a medic appeared out of the darkness. The man had risked his own life to pull Ryan to safety, shielding him from enemy fire and stopping the bleeding long enough for him to survive until reinforcements arrived. That medic had introduced himself only once, in a voice steady despite the chaos. "Name's Isaiah Daniels. Hold on, soldier, you're going to make it." Ryan's grip on the ID card tightened as the memory unfolded in vivid detail. The scars on Isaiah's arms suddenly made sense, as did the quiet strength in his eyes. Ryan's chest tightened with a mix of disbelief and guilt. He had arrested the man who had saved his life, the man to whom he owed everything. Unable to sit still, Ryan stood and walked toward the holding cell. Isaiah was sitting on the bench, his posture relaxed but his gaze sharp. He looked up as Ryan approached, his expression unreadable. "You were in the army," Ryan said, holding up the ID card. His voice was steady, but there was an edge of something else, something he couldn't quite name. Isaiah's eyes flicked to the card and then back to Ryan. "That's right," he said simply. "Medic." Ryan swallowed hard, the weight of his actions pressing down on him like a physical force. "You saved my life," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "In Kandahar. Do you remember?" Isaiah's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "I remember a lot of faces," he said after a moment. "Yours is one of them." Ryan felt a lump rise in his throat. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words wouldn't come. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, Isaiah spoke again. "I've been wondering how long it would take you to figure it out." Ryan took a step back, his mind racing. He felt a surge of anger, not at Isaiah but at himself. How could he have been so blind? How could he have let his biases cloud his judgment to the point where he had arrested the man who had risked everything to save him? "Why didn't you say anything?" Ryan asked, his voice rising with frustration. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" Isaiah shrugged, his calm demeanor unshaken. "Would it have made a difference?" he asked. "Would you have treated me any differently if you'd known?" The question hit Ryan like a punch to the gut. He didn't have an answer, at least not one he was willing to admit. He looked away, unable to meet Isaiah's gaze. The silence that followed was deafening. Ryan felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into an abyss of his own making. He thought of all the times he had let his assumptions dictate his actions, all the moments where he had chosen suspicion over understanding. And now, standing before the man who had saved his life, those choices felt heavier than ever. Isaiah broke the silence, his voice softer now. "Look, I don't hold grudges. What you did last night, it's not the first time I've been on the receiving end of that kind of treatment. But you need to ask yourself why you did it. You need to figure that out." Ryan nodded slowly, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He knew Isaiah was right. He needed to confront the parts of himself he had been avoiding for years. He needed to understand why he had acted the way he did, and more importantly, how he could make things right. As he turned to leave, Isaiah called out to him, "Hey, Callahan." Ryan stopped and looked back. Sometimes we save people not because they deserve it, but because it's the right thing to do. Don't waste the chance you've been given. The words stayed with Ryan as he walked away, echoing in his mind like a mantra. He knew he couldn't change the past, but he could choose what kind of man he wanted to be moving forward. and for the first time in a long time he felt a glimmer of hope that he could be better. Ryan's world felt unsteady as he walked out of the station that evening. The encounter with Isaiah had unearthed memories he had long buried, along with emotions he wasn't ready to face. The words Isaiah had spoken lingered in his mind, reverberating with every step he took. Sometimes we save people not because they deserve it, but because it's the right thing to do. Those words forced him to confront the man he had become and the actions that had led him here. Back in his small apartment, Ryan sat at his kitchen table, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold in front of him. The quiet of the space was overwhelming, pressing down on him in a way he couldn't escape. His mind replayed the events of the arrest over and over again, each time revealing new layers of shame and regret. Isaiah's face haunted him, not with anger or accusation but with calm clarity, as if daring Ryan to see the truth about himself. Ryan's gaze drifted to the corner of the table where a stack of old military memorabilia sat gathering dust. He reached for it, his fingers brushing against the faded fabric of his uniform and the metal of his service medals. At the bottom of the pile was a photograph, creased and worn from years of handling. It was a picture of his unit in Kandahar, a snapshot of a moment that felt like a lifetime ago. And there, standing in the back row with a faint smile, was Isaiah Daniels. The photo was a reminder of the man Ryan had once been, a man who believed in honor, integrity, and doing the right thing no matter the cost. Somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of those values, trading them for cynicism and a rigid sense of control. The realization hit him hard, like a punch to the gut. He had become someone he barely recognized, someone Isaiah would never have risked his life to save. The next morning, Ryan woke with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He knew he couldn't undo the past, but he could take steps to make amends. The first of those steps was to apologize to Isaiah, not just with words but with actions. Ryan returned to the station and began the process of reviewing Isaiah's case. As he delved into the details, it became clear that the charges against Isaiah were baseless. The alleged suspicion of drunk driving was unfounded, and there was no evidence to support the arrest. Ryan filed the paperwork to have the charges dropped and requested an immediate review of Isaiah's case by his superior. He also wrote a detailed report acknowledging his own errors in judgment, knowing it could have consequences for his career. But Ryan didn't care about that. What mattered was doing what was right, even if it meant facing the repercussions of his actions. Later that day, Ryan approached Isaiah's holding cell. Isaiah was sitting on the bench, his hands resting on his knees, his expression as calm as ever. When Ryan unlocked the door and stepped inside, Isaiah looked up, his eyes searching Ryan's face for answers. "You're free to go," Ryan said, his voice steady but tinged with regret. "The charges have been dropped. It should never have happened in the first place. I'm sorry for what I did to you, Isaiah. I'm sorry for everything." Isaiah stood slowly, his gaze never leaving Ryan's. For a long moment he said nothing, the silence stretching between them. Finally he nodded. "Apology accepted," he said simply. "But what are you going to do about it?" Ryan knew Isaiah wasn't just talking about the arrest. He was asking a bigger question, one that demanded a deeper answer. "I'm going to be better," Ryan said. "Not just for you, but for everyone. I've got a lot to make up for, and I don't know if I'll ever get it right. But I'm going to try." Isaiah studied him for a moment before extending his hand. Ryan hesitated, then took it, the handshake solidifying a fragile but significant truce. As Isaiah left the station, Ryan felt a weight lift from his shoulders, replaced by a sense of responsibility he hadn't felt in years. In the weeks that followed, Ryan threw himself into his work with renewed purpose. He began attending workshops on bias and de-escalation tactics, determined to confront the prejudices that had influenced his actions. He also reached out to community organizations, volunteering his time to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the neighborhoods they served. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the progress felt slow, but Ryan knew it was the right path. Meanwhile, Isaiah returned to his life, but his encounter with Ryan left an impression. He continued his work at the warehouse but also began speaking at local schools and community centers, sharing his story and advocating for veterans' rights. His calm demeanor and powerful message resonated with those who heard him, inspiring others to confront their own biases and take steps toward understanding and unity. One evening, several months after their last conversation, Ryan walked into a community center where Isaiah was scheduled to speak. He took a seat in the back, hoping to remain unnoticed. The room was filled with people of all ages and backgrounds, their attention fixed on Isaiah as he stood at the front of the room. Isaiah's voice was steady and clear as he spoke about his experiences, not just as a veteran, but as a man navigating a world that often judged him unfairly. He talked about the importance of empathy, of seeing people for who they truly are rather than through the lens of prejudice. He spoke of the night he was arrested, not to shame Ryan but to illustrate how even the smallest actions can have a ripple effect. At the end of the talk, Ryan approached Isaiah, his heart pounding in his chest. Isaiah saw him and smiled faintly, a look of understanding passing between them. Without a word, Ryan extended his hand, and Isaiah took it, their handshake a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had both undertaken. As Ryan left the community center that night, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He knew there was still work to be done, both within himself and in the world around him, but for the first time he felt like he was on the right path. And for that, he had Isaiah to thank. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel to support more powerful storytelling like this. And don't stop there. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next video. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below to let us know how this story impacted you or what you'd like to see next. Your feedback helps us create meaningful content that connects with you. Thank you for being a part of our community. Your voice matters,